Hello everybody and welcome back to another Future of the Fortress read-along. This is the monthly Q&A that Tarn does on the Bay 12 forums discussing Dwarf Fortress. It's more of a community brainstorming session where people can kind of throw out ideas and or ask questions, and Tarn responds to them around the first of every month. If you'd like to take part in these discussions yourself, you can do that via the link in the description of this video, or you can sign up for an account on the forums. But before we read the general Q&A, we're going to be reading the mission status and Fun with Numbers, which is a little kind of status update that Zach and Tarn post once a month. This one is a little bit heavy as they talk about a death in the family, so if you would like to skip that portion and jump directly to the Q&A, I will put the timestamp on the screen right now. Still here? All right, let's get to reading. Mission status. Three Toe writes, "We were off to a bumpy start last month, but now things look like we might actually have a chance to launch into some smooth sailing. That said, I would like to present two giant middle fingers to the whims of fate, who have completely messed up our lives in the last few months, just when everything was going so well. There is no bright side to this nonsense. Your patience is deeply appreciated. Congratulations to the generous. Three Toe." And Tarn, aka Toady1, elaborates with, "Fun with Numbers. Grandma passed away at the age of 100. For the Dwarf Fortress community, she was the judge of our crayon art rewards. If you got one over the years and didn't make a specific request, it's quite likely she decided your drawing was meant for you. It has been kind of unrelenting, but we're going to try and reboot in November, with some heavy interface sections of adventure mode. And we should be able to show off some stuff next week as well. 11K copies in October. There's a large bump a good while after release. And I'm not even sure why. It looks like we're going to oscillate pretty wildly, which we're used to, of course." The first question is a multi-parter, so I'm only going to read their name once. However, I have split it up for your convenience, so let's get started. This question comes in from Falk, and they say, "Thanks for the answers as always, Toady. And thanks for the update. Those faces look incredible, even if they're still just prototypes. I also love the icon that is the singing turtle person. Hopefully that makes it to release. Since getting a look at someone based on their clothing and description is coming up before the villain's release, is there any chance of wanted posters with the last known description of famous villains rendered on them in a similar style?" And Tarn's response is, "We wanted to incorporate appearance into the visual character info people store in their heads, but have not done so since we need to pare it down to a usable size. Cloaks and masks and tattoos, etc., have been discussed in the context of villain stuff. I'm not sure where it'll go beyond the witness reports and identification generally." Part 2 goes on with, "Will someone with face-obscuring garb still have their eyes, nose, scars, and blue skin, full suite of intellectual values, etc., visible at a glance in their description on the adventure mode once villains are finished? Or fort mode, for that matter?" And Tarn's response is, "We're hoping for masks and cloaks, etc., to matter at some point, in the contexts where they would be most important. I'm not sure about general UI stuff. You can already read dwarf minds, so a certain amount of extra information is always going to be available. But we also try to avoid giving away things like vampires too easily, so it's reasonable to hide stuff depending on the context. Toady, vampires are blue. They're blue. They're already given away. Anyways, moving on. Have you ever played Shadows of Doubt? It's the proc-gen detective games. And they follow up with, "Turbans and different kinds of head clothes are some of the clothing I'm most excited to see rendered in Dwarf Fortress. Dwarves also seem to love wearing them, nearly as much as underwear." And Tarn's response, "Zach played Shadows of Doubt for a bit. I think he had fun with it. Seems cool." And the last part of their multi-parter is, "Will dwarven civilizations ever have a chance to be generated with different styles of clothes, like human cultures are?" And Tarn's final response is, "They probably should. We reduced down the list in the raws to keep things simple, but they don't need to be simple, probably." The next question comes in from Volleylol, and they say, "Does the latest devlog mean that we're getting a palletized Forgotten Beasts and other proc-gen creatures next update?" And Tarn's response is, "It doesn't, not immediately. We want to think a little more about that, but we're very likely heading that way. Our main case, which I just need to do the raws for, is the equipment, clothing, hair, bodies of the main civilized creatures. I've already got it working for the portraits, so it's just a matter of a lot of raw text. And of course, whenever you look at that giant layer creature text file for the dwarves, etc., it really does become time to probably make it shorter somehow, rather than adding palette cases all over. And we'll see where that goes. The next question comes in from Kotivich, and they say, why don't you make a toolkit for translators? And Tarn quotes Putnam's response, so I will read her response first, and she says, I am working on dynamic text sizes, and that is absolutely something I want to keep in mind, if nothing else. I want to make the UI easy to modify into something resembling localization, even if we don't have proper stuff. And Tarn's follow-up is, yeah, agreeing with the general vibe of these responses. It's just a hard problem, but we're also interested in figuring it out. It's not simple to set up a format for something like Legends mode, appearance, paragraphs, etc., to get translated elements to fit the screen, as people mention. But it's also not an impossible problem, but a lot of work. The next question comes in from Malrock III, and they say, so we know that spheres will influence world generations significantly more by that point, but how will spheres like revenge or rumors or lust or fame work in that regard? They don't seem all that geography-y to me, at least without another sphere to ground it. And for that matter, what of the combination? Let us say I have a god of fame, rumors, trees, the rain, and two of those trees and the rain seem to be the core of our theoretical godly biome, but how would the others affect it? Similarly, currently, we can get things like necromancers and demons corrupting land using their spheres as a baseline, and I understand that with future world gen and magic, we will likely have various wizards and gods being able to do that with any sphere. But what if we had an area that was already tainted or blessed by someone else? How would a blessing and a curse placed upon a land interact? Two blessings or two curses? And Tarn quotes Patrick Lundell here in their responses, so I will read their response first. And they say, I'm guessing, of course, but some spheres probably won't have any terrain effects as such. Instead, things like revenge would firstly manifest through the worshipper doctrine, and possibly secondly as a skew in the propensity for creatures within the sphere's influence to select that course of action, although that could be tricky to implement. In the combination case, the above could apply, i.e. worshippers in particular seek fame in its many forms and engage in rumor mongering, which might assist in the fame creation process. In this particular combination, non-worshippers within the influence ought to be skewed towards fame seeking and might have a higher probability of sharing rumors or lower trust threshold for it. Intersecting spheres would probably overlap as the default, and clash when conflicting. Thus, you might be blessed with luck while cursed with a shortened lifespan, or many crops might die due to a blight, but the ones that don't might be bountiful, due to a blessing of a bounty. When spheres clash, the end result would likely be an average of their respective power in the area, probably with a random factor. Obviously, implementing all variants, or rather a system that generates effect combinations, will probably be tricky, and not fully thought out yet, and probably run into snags that will force things to change. And Tarn's response to that very long response is, yeah, agree with the response here. That mainly we haven't thought through specific examples for every sphere. I don't think it needs to be limited to worshipper behavior, or even influencing intelligent creatures, but those are the most straightforward cases to work with. We're certainly not going to have comprehensive coverage in our first pass, since some of the effects would likely take a bit of time to implement, and we'll need to push through it and not do some. All the same, the most simple way to do multiple spheres and combos is just to add multiple traits. It's better when they relate to each other in some more interesting way, but the sim does a form of that on its own at least. Certain locations can also emphasize one sphere over others depending on how the myth worked. The handy thing about the myth gen will be giving us some extra content to use here. A deity might have a sphere for a reason unrelated to its relationship to the land or creation. In the most simple cases, conflicts are additive, or last in first in wins. But depending on what causes the change, It could be more interesting than that. With whatever cosmic friction going on, could lead to something else entirely. But it's just going to be a matter of what we get to. The first concern is just getting something basic in, and then having the most simple change mechanic we can, since we wanted things to be changeable. The next question comes in from Delfonso, and they say, within the overhaul of the Adventurer creator, will we be seeing embark profiles like in Fortress mode? Likewise, would it be possible to have custom labor details, something similar that could be moved between forts, worlds, installs, etc.? And Tarn's response is, it makes sense to have those since it's time-consuming process to pull together a character, though you run into the same trouble of not having the same items available every time, and it might be worse here depending on how the clothing is stored and handled. Definitely appreciate the desire to be able to import labor details and work orders, etc., and there's a lot of redundant work when you've played several forts. And we're going to keep the fort updates coming. Better archers are still number one, if I recall, and we'll be addressing stuff and feedback as we go. The next question comes in from DPH Kraken, and they say, how were the statistics for the weapons determined? I can figure out how weights would be calculated, but I don't know what sort of formulas or educated guesses were used for the attack types. And Tarn's response is, there weren't any formal calculations or anything. I think the community has produced better numbers as of a long while ago. As with the economy, combat basics are something we haven't looped back around to yet, despite it being a long while. I'm not sure which direction we'll be coming from. The next question comes in from Kyo1995, and they say, how do you feel with the end of the UI work finally on the horizon? Do you plan on taking a well-deserved vacation after it's done? And Tarn's response is, it really doesn't feel that way, with so much adventure mode left to do. And I'm not sure there'll be a special vacation. I think it will be nice to arrive at the first graphical adventure mode release, though. That'd be nice. The next question comes in from the Buttery Mess, and they say, do you have a good idea of what and how to implement the map rewrite? Or are you going to make it up as you go when you do it? By this, I mean mathematical systems for generating geographical features, procedurally modifying them, storing data, and recalling information, and have you got the math ready to implement? Or are you expecting a protracted period of creative experimentation? A lot of people don't realize that stuff doesn't always exist in procedurally generated worlds until the user looks at it. To create the illusion of permanency, but how much is permanent in Dwarf Fortress, at least graphically, and how much is generated on demand, if you know what I mean. Will this change with the rewrite? It's my understanding that the world gen will receive more procedural layers, tectonics, layer folding, falling god corpses, etc., and also allow for more dynamic features like icebergs and floating islands, etc. Will it not be difficult to stitch existing systems that interact with geography into the new map system? For example, plopping cities onto terrain, or have you thought of that? And Tarn's response is, we're at an in-between state, as usual. I have a long list of things that I need the maps to do, and I've thought about each of them down to the data structures, in some cases and not others. The open question we're trying to tackle now is just how much we can avoid a big wait entirely, or can we maintain save compatibility? Since it seems vaguely possible, the only part I think is unavoidably long now is the multi-camera setup, and maybe there's still some way to get that work to go a little faster. Most other parts of the Myth and Magic rewrite can be done in pieces without one big push, though, of course, there are reasons to think about things that way sometimes. But yeah, we've always relied on a multi-tiered system of performance, which has worked very well for us. The basic structure of this is the world, which is permanent, and then mid-level maps, and then the play area, and then lots of helper structures at those levels. The site to... If any of you understood that, please explain down in the comments section. Let's continue. I've thought about which new top, mid, and low-level structures will help us accomplish our goals. Ultimately, if we can get away from the block columns replacing them with stuff with tops and bottoms, I don't think the lower level play area needs to change a lot for this map rewrite, which is good news, because that's where most of the time would go. Then we can start connecting up all sorts of weird higher level structures on a judicious basis, and bring in some extra low level data to handle stuff like illusionary walls, etc., which present a lot of weird problems, but in their own domain, rather than the map rewrite domain. Getting away from block columns is doable, but we need to handle the problem of stuff that falls off the bottom of the map, mainly whether that's projectiles, or water, or a living creature, or a corpse. And this is not simple, unless we just delete stuff, which isn't satisfying. Once you have multiple worlds don't need to be permanent, but you lose a lot when you delete one, since you can't just run out a whole world gen every time you need it. Unless it's a low population, small, ever-changing, in which case you might be able to. Right now, cities rely on a bit of knowledge of elevation and rivers and the world, road network, etc. And when they are laying themselves out, we'd like to generalize the way the data is stored, but they don't know their precise elevations until pretty late in the process, which should help us out a lot. And ultimately, if the typography gets bendy enough that elevation doesn't mean anything, then we will need to revisit the existing city generator more. This should be fine, because we can visit that step when we choose. And it isn't even a save compatibility problem, if we're careful about which sites we have visited and where they are in relation to regions that might suddenly become more interesting. Player forts pinning down existing rectangles is a similar problem. The next question comes in from Lexiville, and they say, in terms of the game's atmosphere, I remember reading somewhere that the effect of waves on the oceans are still in the works for the new graphics. From that, I'm curious, are there any plans to display bloodstains on walls as well? It's a really cool detail in the ASCII mode, and I hope eventually this makes it to the new graphics, among any other graphical features that may still be missing. And Tarn's response is, yeah, we'd like to get it all in there. There aren't a ton of pixels to work with on our walls, but I'm sure something can be done. The next is a double-parter, but it's quick, and it comes in from Beeg, and they say, will portraits in Steam Adventure Mode get updated to show wounds, scars, if the player or NPC gets a head injury and survives? And 2, will the advanced attack menu still be in the Steam version of Adventure Mode? If the players figure out how to use it, they gain a much tighter control over how their character fights in past versions of Adventure Mode. And Tarn's responses are, yeah, we already have several down, though I don't have a raw format set up yet. And yes, we aren't taking any of those options away. It's a weird game where you can do 2 or more simultaneous attacks, and you specify with multiple variables, and that's how it will remain. Gotta respect critters with all those arms and all those daggers. And the simple attack options, which already exist, will also be there. The next question comes in from Eric Blank, and they say, has that issue with invisible critters being unfindable and untargetable been tackled? If it is solved, how do you intend to implement the hide interaction in the future? Invisibility until close range dependent on observation, or a few ticks in ambush and sneak mode with positive rolls. And Tarn's response is, it has not, as far as I know. It feels like it depends on the existing combat and observation relationship of multiple critters involved to get it right. It'll just need to track that, and probably allow wild or studied attacks into open space that can still connect. And there'd be a metagame if there's a player trying to guess, too, or using info we don't know about. But hopefully, something better than a walk command failing or something. Though a more verbose form of that is also proper. And the last question of this month's Future of the Fortress comes in from Petty Relic. And they say, do you think Dwarf Fortress will see lawmaking in the future? I imagine it would make for an interesting gameplay element to stray from your original civilization's culture, for better or for worse. and deal with the consequences. Maybe the lawmaking branch of a baron could get ousted for making unpopular laws, like rationing or banning science. And Tarn's response is, yeah, we've been planning to do this for a long while with the Civ, Rewrite, and Embark scenario stuff. That's still the idea, the ability to stray from your civilization beyond rejecting barony and murdering any nobles that happen to come by. May come sooner since the way it works now feels more and more of a blocker with army and siege stuff on the horizon. And now that we've made it to the end of this month's Future of the Fortress, I just want to have two quick announcements. Number one, I now have a lore mug up for sale on my merch store. It's got an image of a dwarf reading a lot and learning about all of the lore. If you like lore in video games or Dwarf Fortress or just lore in general or want a good mug for the holidays, maybe you should pick up one or three of these as some stocking stuffers for your friends. Check those out on my merch store. They do actually help keep this channel funded along with my patrons, which you're probably seeing on the screen right now. The second thing I would like to tell you is that on the 9th of November at 3 p.m. Pacific time on Twitch and YouTube, I will be streaming a live interview with Tarn Adams once again. It's that time where we do a big old Q&A. There will also be a video going up around the same time as this video with links to send in questions. So I will link to that video in the description of this video as well as to the forum where you can send in questions. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Also live on Twitch and YouTube. Cheers!